So today I'm with Julie Menanno. She's the author of the upcoming book, or for many of you, the book will already have been released, published. It will be available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, anywhere that you find books. And so I've been listening to Julie's podcasts for weeks, and for quite some time, I've just absorbed what I could as far as attachment theory. And a lot of it, primarily, at least what I've read, a large percentage of it has to do with people out in struggling to find love and who are still in the market as far as
Mhm.
dating and all that. But what I really love about Julie's material is the fact that if you're in a relationship, and so many people who are married or partnered and they get locked into this really destructive dance, this toxic cycle of communication, and but not knowing any better, the fact that you have a lot of people, for instance, you have some individuals that maybe they're, and actually it's on both sides, that their emotional needs weren't met, but
Mhm.
some go into this more anxious style of attachment where their basic needs were, they feel deprived and somewhat abandoned, fearful of abandonment. And I'm sure, Julie, you can articulate it better very quickly than I can. And then you have the avoidant, where their emotional needs were more dismissed, and we don't go there emotionally, and so they are less in touch. They tend to be less sensitive, but they're so locked into their habitual modes of just coping, relating, that initially formulated or developed in childhood, and so that could be very destructive in relationship. But so I don't want to go on. I rather have Julie. She's much more articulate, knowledgeable about this. So first, Julie, um, would you like to say anything else about your background or anything? And then from there,
Sure.
what would you like to add on to that as far as the basics of the attachment styles?
Well, sure. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I do
Mhm.
specialize in working with couples. I only work with couples. I
Mhm.
work from the perspective of what's called emotionally focused therapy for couples, which is a type of therapy that uses attachment theory to help couples go from insecure attachment to secure attachment. And it is my absolute passion. My number one passion is in life is working with couples, and virtually everything that, not everything that I know, I've studied attachment theory extensively, but the depth that I can go to comes from just being with my couples, and they teach me everything.
So I think from what I remember hearing is something that you have six children, and as the youngest one, somewhere in there, you felt a sense that something was missing, and that led you to
Mhm.
pursue. That was part of like the initial prompting. Can you elaborate on that, or?
Yeah, from a very, very young age, I wanted a lot of children. Because I think I wanted this sense of family that I didn't fully have growing up. My parents were struggling themselves and a lot of pain themselves. And,
Mhm.
really through no fault of their own, they didn't create a very emotionally supportive environment. And there wasn't a lot of information out there to help them do that. And if you don't grow up with it and you don't have that information, then, what else do you do? Right. And so they did the best they could, but it was a pretty emotionally deprived home. And I just had this longing for a family. I never, you know, I planned to have four children, but we had a surprise twins and then another surprise in there. So, but I went into it just like I gotta get this right. This is really everything to me is how I do with my children. And
Mm.
so I was reading all these parenting books, and I was trying to just put the right elements in, put the right ingredients into the recipe. And what I knew as being the right ingredients was, well, I'll be a stay-at-home mom, I'll I'll create structure. I will feed them the right food, put them in the right clothes, get them in the right school. And then that's just, everything will work out beyond that. And that wasn't working for us. My kids were not getting, my first two especially were not getting their emotional needs met because I just didn't know how. I know that they felt really loved, and, it wasn't like this terribly abusive environment, but there was just no emotional validation. They just really didn't have help with their emotional being, and other than just sort of a felt sense of love with it, which I think a lot of people have, but they don't have the emotional support that goes along with it. And it's better to have a felt sense of love than not, right? But there's always perfecting we can do. And so I was reading all the parenting books I could. And by the time I got to my third, I had discovered what's called attachment parenting, which is different from attachment theory slightly. It's more, about physical bonding, making sure that the baby is, well, the way I did it was I carried my third daughter in a sling kind of all day long. I slept with her, and I did that with my last four children. I parented in that way. And I don't mean to create a high bar for parents out there who can't or aren't interested in that level of closeness. But for me, it really worked. It was a really beautiful experience to be able to support them in that way. And this bond we were able to create was incredible. But then it was like after that baby period, I still didn't really know what to do. When they start turning into toddlers and they're not just attached to you all the time, and they have their own little minds. And so I ended up just reading all I could, trying to heal myself, trying to improve my parenting. And I ended up figuring out, like, I'm not really getting the depth of the information that I need. So I'm just going to have to go back to grad school and learn it. And so that's what I did. And I really quickly, we weren't learning attachment theory in the program, but I really quickly found it on my own. And I just kind of immersed myself in that. And from the moment I found attachment theory, kind of everything started to fall into place. And I've only become better as a human, as a wife, as a mother, and as a therapist, helping people. And, I then took that into the world with Instagram, and I feel like I found my calling, and it feels really good. And everything's sort of fitting, because of attachment theory, truly.
I'm curious to hear a little more about how it's transformed you and the way you're relating to your children, because just even in my own work, the work I do with individuals, I see this and feel the woundedness in individuals, and where many of their needs are not met, and doing what I can do on my end to facilitate the healing of those wounds. But on your end, the transformation that you've gone through and how it's changed you, and the difference that you see is, say, from the oldest children to the youngest, and how they've developed. I'm curious if you could say a little more about that, because I'm always fascinated.
Yeah, I will. My older two children, when I started kind of learning these and started being able to show up for them emotionally, when they were a little older, kind of early teens, that's where it sort of started. And then I just kept getting better at it. They're doing so well. I mean, I have such a good relationship with them that I just want people out there to know that this really is reversible. When you start to learn how, people need emotional support until the day they die. I mean, maybe after they die. And there's always an opportunity to help someone heal by being a healing presence for them. And but they did, they have struggled more with anxiety, things like that, than the younger ones who were getting more of what they needed from an early age. I think I forgot the question. You asked about how do I relate to them? Is that
both how it's transformed you as an individual,
okay?
and as a therapist too, and also the differences that you're seeing in your children from the oldest to the youngest,
Mhm,
because as you've transformed, and it's your ability to parent, to be a mother,
mhm.
also to be a therapist. The
Yeah.
because just listening to you as you speak, and also the message that you share, which you have the most amazing Instagram, Facebook page
Thank
of
you.
anyone. Just
I really
so
appreciate that.
concise, and how you present these messages for people, especially if you're in a relationship. It's like the basic foundational instructions for
Mhm,
how to cultivate a healthy and loving relationship. So that's really coming
mhm.
through there. And so I want to hear more about the transformation that you've gone through, and how you're seeing that play out in the quality of the relationships with your children, and also
Yeah,
with
my
your
clients, yeah.
patients.
Yeah, so, we're really what I've learned is you can only go as far with another person as you've gone with yourself, because you
Hmm.
start to see these parts of yourself, you really can't see them in others until you find them within.
Hmm.
And so I started learning how to find it within, really what a big, I started with kind of like self-compassion, like this material helped me organize myself around why, all these things that kind of weren't working in my life or weren't working about the way I was interacting with people, like that makes sense. It makes sense given the environment that I grew up in. And we all kind of know, hey, people have their issues from childhood, but there's like this big leap from poor childhood to issues in adulthood without really that very clear connecting of the dots. And so the more I could get that clear connecting of the dots, the more I was able to have compassion with myself. Like, I understand myself. I grew up really kind of believing I was a bad person underneath it all. Like a selfish person, a bad person, and anything I was getting wrong was really kind of related to that core of my being. And I started to realize that's not true. And once I was able to really internalize, like I'm good, I'm beautiful, I'm in pain, then I was able to be a different person, kind of see those parts in other people, which is always an ongoing process, especially when people aren't being their best selves. But then I got into somatic therapy, not as a therapist, but as a client. And that was a real game changer because I learned to feel. That was the first time I really learned, oh, these feelings are in my body. Like, there
Hmm.
they are, they're not in my head. And that helped me start to be better at self-regulating. And when you can get better at
Hmm.
self-regulating, you're better at co-regulating, and you're just better at making wise decisions with the voice of your emotions. And that was a game changer. And then the kind of third layer was really getting to the bottom of the barrel of my triggers and moments, and really recognizing, hey, these triggers, like, yeah, we're talking about the garage door, but they're like actually going to these really painful places that we all kind of carry, these kind of insecure parts. Even if we have a lot of confidence in life and success in life, there are these insecure parts that are saying, maybe it is all me, maybe it is that I'm just selfish, or maybe it is that no matter what I do, I'm not going to get it right, or maybe I'm not really worthy of love. And so what happened is my the way this sort of played out with my relationship with my husband and my relationship with my kids is I started going from when they come to me with their pain, right? Like, for example, my one of my daughters right now she's 15, and she's going through some stuff with a friend group. And she's kind of getting mad, I think, to be honest with you, it's all their fault. But she's getting mad, and because she's getting kind of ostracized by them right now for something, some perceived uh, thing that she did that, just kind of girl drama, to be honest with you. I think this is how
Hmm.
they learn what they want out of relationships, is going through this. And so she's kind of was getting stuck in, like, I'm so mad at them. Like, how can they not hear my side here? And I want to come in as a mom. That part of me wants to come in and say, you need to just like go find people who treat you well and like can listen to you. But that approach just only goes so far. And when I'm
Yeah.
really able to do with her what I do with my couples, which is really help her get to that bottom of the barrel piece, which is, there is a part of me that worries it's about me. There is a part of me that worries that maybe I am kind of a jerk, and I'm at fault here. And it sometimes can feel safer to just kind of focus on them without really taking this opportunity to dig down and find really what's happening inside of her. And whenever I can kind of usher my kids into that space that's there, we all have these insecure parts. That is when they can get help with those places and don't have to be alone with those darkest places. And if you really think about, at the end of the day, all of this attachment theory work is about really this existential fear of death and being alone that
Mhm.
we are biologically wired to have, and to keep us, connected to other humans and safe. And so when I can get them down into that place, they're no longer alone with these darkest places, these most painful places. And that's the healing, is not having to be alone. And that's exactly what I do with the couples I treat. Is we start with kind of stabilizing their negative cycle. Let's do some damage control here. But then as they get more equipped, better equipped to communicate about themselves and their conflicts out of these negative cycles, we start to be able to do this deeper work. And I start to help them show up for each other in their deepest, darkest places, which is exponentially bonding and healing. And that only creates more resilience for them. So it's like we're addressing that negative cycle from multiple different directions. One, we're doing it with, new communication and kind of behavioral changes. And then on the other side, we're really addressing it from this deeper place that I have found to go myself. And, as I have grown, the way I show up for my clients is very different. I don't, there's a way of helping people that, you can get kind of frustrated, like, why aren't you changing? Why aren't you changing? And I don't do that anymore. I don't
Mm.
do that. I can stay I have this really ability that I'm incredibly proud of, because I've worked so hard to get there, where
Mm.
I can stay so grounded and stay there as that emotional support for them as they're learning to emotionally support themselves and each other. And you can really get more from people when you're just kind of staying with them, but pushing them a little out of their comfort zone with gentleness and validation instead of force, and, these things that we've kind of learned to be in the world, because that's what our culture is doing around us, is that. So there. That's a lot.
Wow. Yeah. I have a lot of appreciation for what you're doing there because, and I've gotten a taste of that from watching some of your other broadcasts and
Mhm,
even just reading your posts about how you take people, what you're describing, into those depths, into that bottom of the barrel. I know, like, years ago, I didn't have anyone there for me, and I
mhm,
had to intuitively take myself there. And in my own process, I would dive into the depths of it. Sometimes the pain would be
mhm,
so excruciating, but
mhm.
I would go into the very middle and I would just keep breathing softly and deeply.
Wow.
At a certain point, it would break open. I could feel the pain come out of my body in
Mhm,
waves, these emanations of warmth emerging from within. But that was what I taught myself to do because no
sure,
one else was there for me. But I'm
sure.
curious your process, how you're
Mhm,
doing that, because I've seen that you describe that in your posts, and I've gotten a taste of you're guiding people into these places. So I'd love to hear you
mhm,
elaborate more on how you're doing that with people. And I very much appreciate your capacity to
mhm.
be able to take people there and remain present with them because there's so much resistance
There
in our
are yeah.
society, this don't go there kind of mentality, but you're
Mhm.
taking exactly where they need to go. So, yeah, please elaborate.
Sure. So, well, the first thing I would say is I meet people where they are. I'm not
Mhm.
going to try to move you away from your resistances. Your resistances are important. They've kept you, safe emotionally. They're there for a very good reason. My
Mhm.
job is really more just to explore what's the function of these resistances? How are they helping you? And then, when people feel met with that and they feel like it's okay, there's permission in this space to have this resistance. It doesn't make me bad or broken, or, and there's strength in that. There's value in those resistances, but there's also, this other side of it where there's so much, um, value in putting them down when we need to connect. And so, I just kind of meet people where they are, help them explore that, help validate those resistances. And then they feel safe enough to kind of go, maybe there's some value here. Maybe I'm not going to have someone asking me right now just to like throw my walls out the window and expose me to, everything dark and deep inside of me. And then we just kind of slowly go through there. And when you really start to open the door into those resistances and start to shine some safe light on them, that is the work, because the hurt is in the resistances. And so we just kind of keep going into what would happen if you didn't have these resistances. What would you have to feel? What do you think is there? When I just talk about, these moments when you start to feel those resistances dissolve, what comes up in your body? That must be really scary, and I also use triggers with their partner in really specific moments, and just kind of keep going into, what is it that you're trying not to feel? Let's feel some of it. I'm going to take you into it, then I'm going to pull you out of it. I'm going to take you into it, and you're going to set the pace here, not me. I'm going to push you a little bit out of your comfort zone. This is especially the work with avoidant partners, because they're usually more closed off. Although anxious partners are closed off in their own way. And so then we can just start to kind of let that view of self, let that negative view of self, let those insecure parts kind of emerge. They emerge on their own if you create this really safe place for people to tell their stories. It's a process that has taken me a decade to, I say, master, and I still haven't mastered it. I mean, it's not something that, it's hard to explain it kind of succinctly, because there's so many different interventions and pieces, and it's kind of like doing chess. You're moving with the game, you're moving with the person, you're taking them in, you're taking them out. And that's why I'm such a nerd about this work. But yeah, so it's kind of the same thing with my kids. It's almost just like creating space to allow the pain to emerge, and then being there with them in that. And I do think, to speak to what you said, there's so much value in learning to do this yourself. I think there's this idea in the attachment theory world and the EFT world that, co-regulation is so much more effective. And I do believe that than self-regulation, but I don't know how, as adults, we really do need to self-regulate. It is really, really important that we learn to self-regulate, because how do we co-regulate without self-regulation? So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, very much so. We could go in so many different directions, right? And I'm very much impressed with the fact that I've said this to other people, practitioners, therapists, healers, whatever, is that you have to go there first before you can lead anyone. And the fact that you've done your own deep work, many people can go through the training as a therapist, but it doesn't necessitate that they've gone to those most vulnerable places, but you demonstrate through your work that you have yourself. And
definitely,
yeah, which is one of the things I appreciate. So one thing that I'm really curious about is, okay, you have, and again, I appreciate so much about your work is that, okay, when you're in the context of a relationship, marriage or partnership, you're living together, for instance, and you're presenting these models of, just a lot of the basic communication skills, things that most of us have never really learned because it wasn't modeled for us. What about you have so many individuals who are And even if we are married, a lot of times
Mhm.
marriages dissolve,
Mhm.
and we find ourselves single again, and we're
Yeah.
out there in the world. And so I think there's a lot of these skills, or so much of what you teach can also apply to those who are currently not partnered.
Mhm.
And as we develop these skills and capacities, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's great for people to not only read your book or listen to your book as well, but to visit your Instagram and your Facebook page, because you'll internalize a lot of these skills. Or what about for those people who are, say, still in the dating market,
Mhm.
and whether they're dealing with they fall more into the avoidant attachment camp, or if I articulate that well,
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
the more anxious, and which I think the people who are more anxious are the ones who are going to be listening to this broadcast.
Mhm. Well, so the book I think is incredible for people who are single
Mhm,
because it paints the picture of a healthy relationship. It puts the skills out there. You can, if you go into a new relationship understanding the concept of a negative cycle, you're going to be able to recognize it immediately.
mhm,
And when you can recognize it, the relationship goes from these kind of vague, repetitive arguments and fights that might kind of get worse over time to something that is really organized and makes a lot of sense. And you can start to work with it in a much more practical, effective way. So,
mhm,
oh my gosh, like if I could convince the whole world to get 5 sessions of this type of work
mhm,
when they decide to be serious with a person and have a commitment, I think it would save them a lot of time and a lot of heartache later. I mean,
mhm,
people who have been together for 10 years and have just continued to erode their relationship to various degrees. It does take a lot longer to kind of pick through all of it. But yeah, I mean, so it paints the picture of like, here's what's going on with you. Here's why you're kind of showing up in relationships, whether it's romantic and dating or just, what you grew up with or friends. We need to figure out what's happening inside of you because really
mhm,
this is, at the end of the day, it's self-work that you use to bond with other people. And that's going to help people say, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Here are all these skills. And if I'm not able to give those, and if I'm not able to know how to look for someone who can give them back, I
mhm,
am going to end up kind of stuck. And so it builds tons of awareness. We all have relationships with ourselves,
mhm,
and the way that we react to our triggers, the way that we react to our emotions, is going to parallel how we help others with theirs. Just that's why that self-work is so important. It doesn't
mhm,
always show up in the exact same way, but it's going to show up at the exact same degree of health or lack of. So I highly, and this is not just me trying to push the book, I highly recommend. It's almost like, here's a manual of relationships. Here's what they need to look
mhm.
like. Here's how to get there. And some people are going to need more help than what this book can provide. But that's always the case, I think, with self-help, right?
And even if you go into therapy, for instance, if I very much recommend for the listening audience, read your Instagram or your Facebook page, listen to your book, because as I've been looking at your Instagram, Facebook, as I've been listening to you, and I've been going back through relationships over the course of my life.
Mhm.
I remember way back there, you were talking about disorganized attachment. I was thinking about someone that I was seeing for a very, very briefly, and yet
Mhm.
the fact that I still care about people,
Mhm.
and recognizing how wounded she was. And then the relational dynamics that I've had or that played out in my own life, I feel that it's helped me to understand that more. I had a really interesting phenomena. I want to bring this up in relation to what you're saying, for instance. So for me, growing up with a fair amount of physical and emotional abuse, and because of that, a very anxious attachment style.
Mhm.
So when I lived in Native American communities, I actually found it very much easier to bond or form attachments. And then when I transitioned back into mainstream society,
Mhm.
especially dating within this dominant culture, I would get into that pattern of, where I would have those, again, anxious attachments, and it was very difficult. And I found a lot of the women in this culture, the response is that there was very little acceptance for those
Mhm.
deeply wounded or traumatized parts of me. But then later on, when I was in India and Sri Lanka, there was much more acceptance.
Mhm.
And being within that context, I felt safe, I felt comfortable. And
Mhm.
so then there was the more secure attachment within
Mhm.
that context and stuff.
Mhm.
But a lot of times, because I wasn't able to heal within the context of the relationship, it forced me to do the work on my own to address my own woundedness. And then that brought me to a place of establishing more secure attachment.
Mhm.
But I know with your work, it's given me a lot more cognitive understanding of processes that I've done internally very
Mhm.
intuitively. And I feel everyone needs that cognitive understanding. But
Yeah.
can you elaborate, or what would you have to say?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that you can definitely use this information. It's kind of like there's an implicit knowledge and explicit knowledge, right? So
Mhm,
I am, one side of my family, my dad's side of the family is Native American.
mhm,
My mom's side of the family is very kind of British Isles, a stiff upper lip, right?
mhm.
And I didn't, my grandma, who's the Native American, my dad's mom,
What
um,
tribe?
Delaware and Cherokee. So the Delaware was
Okay,
rolled into Cherokee, but
okay,
yeah, and then the Delaware rolled out of Cherokee. So
okay,
we were Delaware, and then we became Delaware and Cherokee, and Delaware rolled out. So now I officially have membership in both tribes, but
okay.
really it's Delaware. I should say blood-wise, it's Delaware. So, um, my grandma, the Delaware Indians were known for joy and humor, right?
Mhm,
And I felt so secure with my grandma. Like, I just felt so secure with her. I was like a different child when I was with her than I
mhm,
was with that other side of my family. And so all of our attachment energy is, relationship context. I had, at the
mhm,
end of the day, underneath all of it, I had an anxious attachment, no question. And that's how
mhm,
I operated in my um, romantic relationships as I grew into that. But
mm,
this is relationship context. I mean, it's all kind of like playing off of each other and feeding off of each other. And it's really a good thing. It's kind of like, well, the brain is always plastic, right? And so
mhm,
we can, we're healing ourselves, but by getting into relationship with safer others, and they don't have to be perfectly healed, that is going to help us with our journey towards security. Why? Because relationships with people who are more healed are safe. They just feel safer.
mhm,
We're not having to wonder what they think. We're not feeling emotionally abandoned by them.
mhm,
There's so much safety. And so when you have that safe base, it's just easier to heal yourself. But as you heal yourself, it's easier to find people who are safer, and it's easier to know what to look for, and it's easier to be that safe person yourself. And yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. I think there's a combination of things, because what I've found is that when those of us who carry a lot of this emotional wounding trauma, and there's, on one hand, it creates this filter and it just obscures our vision, and the pain lives inside of us, and
I'm so
we're
sorry. Hold on,
it's okay.
let me just text my daughter. She's just calling on, can you, I'm so sorry.
No,
Okay,
no
I'm back.
problem.
She's
Okay.
just at a store, and she's she's not in danger. Okay, go ahead.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a moment of being human. So,
Yes.
a moment of being a responsible mother. I appreciate that. So, so anyway, so as I was saying, when we carry a lot of this emotional wounding or trauma, it just creates this filter. And the fact that most of us suppress our emotions, we haven't learned how to work constructively with our emotions.
Yes.
We're seeing through that filter. We're not fully cognizant or conscious of what's happening. And so we
Hmm.
tend to form attachments to individuals who reenact a lot of this
For
early
sure.
trauma.
Yeah.
And and so what happens is we gravitate towards those individuals and they reenact a lot of our emotional wounding. We gravitate towards individuals who are in some ways replicas of the people who hurt us deeply. But as we go through the steps to heal our own deep emotional wounding, what happens is that we tend to be drawn more towards healthier individuals. I
Yes.
found that over time that because there are some individuals that they have no willingness, desire, impetus to heal, to grow, to
Sure.
evolve,
Hmm.
and there is even a repulsion towards those, like just
Hmm.
stay away from me, don't
And
get
these are my
close.
favorite people to work with, by the way. Okay, go ahead.
The ones who don't
Yeah.
want to go there, who don't want to do the
Yes,
work.
absolutely. Because
Well, tell
because
me.
of being able to meet them where they are and get them to that place while honoring their desire not to go. The healing is in the
Uh-huh.
desire not to go there. The healing is in the resistance. So again, there's so much to be said about that clinically and therapeutically skill wise, but there, I do
Go
think I
ahead,
particularly
elaborate.
well. Yeah, I work really well with avoidant attached individuals because
Mhm,
they just need safety, honestly. And, of course, these are the ones that are coming to therapy. We always have to remember that to begin with. And usually they're being dragged by their partner in. Um, are you okay? I saw you freeze up a bit.
okay.
Yeah. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did because it seemed like your sound went out a minute. Okay,
It seemed like
go
what?
ahead. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Your sound went out for just a
Did
second.
it? Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really just fulfilling. I mean, it's super fulfilling to be able to, how can I even word it? I mean, I think so many people who are resistant, they've been told you're
Mhm,
resistant, you don't wanna heal,
mhm,
and so they're internalizing these messages that healing is really super threatening because then
mhm,
I have to, subconsciously there's this awareness that I've survived in life by not going there. I have
mhm,
survived. If I would have gone there as a kid, I wouldn't have been successful. How would I wouldn't have been manly, I wouldn't have been a strong woman, all these really good
mhm,
reasons. And then it's threatening on top of that because now they're getting shamed for that resistance. And
mm,
so when you can bring someone in and say, hey, there's a lot of value in your resistance. And I don't want to take that away from you. I'm not here to take that away from you. I'm here to kind of maybe balance some things out. Um, and show you the strength in that, right? That you are a survivor because of that resistance. And on the other side of it, there's this, you know, acceptance, non-shaming of that part, right? And with that safety, you can get this opening in. It's like they just need to hear it's okay. They just need to hear, you're not bad because of this. And there's also this validating piece because their partner has all these issues too, but they've
mhm,
been getting these messages, the relationship is bad because you won't open up, you won't do the work. And as we kind of organize things into these negative cycles, it starts to become apparent that their partner is equally resistant. They're just showing it by externalizing. Their resistance is more like externalized as you've got to change. So there's a lot to be
mm,
said for this, but you kind of slowly you make space for that resistance, you honor that resistance, and then you slowly start to give them success in the therapy room with letting those resistant chipping away at them. And they start to have success with going there. It's my mentor calls it success and vulnerability. He works with
mm,
the NFL, he works with veterans, he works with these kind of he's an ex 9/11 firefighter, went in and rescued people from, the buildings. You've probably heard me talk about that if you've listened to enough
Yes, I have.
podcasts. So we're actually going to write the next book together that's kind of geared either toward men or just anybody who's having a hard time, and helping people see the value in it. So it's like, if you're honoring their resistance and at the same time you're giving them some success, felt success with letting some of it go, people will buy in.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. And maybe a little background information about what led them to, you're describing at this point more the avoidant attachment, and
Mm-hmm.
what was going on that led them to, this is how they present, or this is how they come to be so
Mm-hmm.
resistant. So my
They learned, at an early age, very, very early, pre-verbally, most of the time, if I show up with emotions, I'm going to overwhelm my caregiver. I'm going to feel rejected. I'm going to feel ignored. I'm going to feel shamed. Any number of responses that are either just not supportive or on one extreme, or just very shaming and punitive on the other extreme. I mean, I've had clients who go to school and get bullied and come home and tell their dad and brother, and they get shamed by their dad and brother because you're too much of a wimp. Why are you getting bullied? And
Mhm.
they've learned the value. The way to stay emotionally safe is to stuff it far away. Just don't go there. Put this lid on it. Get your emotional needs met in the second best way, which is be a success in the world, or sometimes that turns into, I should be a success in the world, but I'm not. So I'm full of shame. But the idea is to become this surface part of ourselves that gets acceptance. And we're not really, there's really just no value in going there. If I do go there, if I do start talking about emotions, I don't know what to do with them. I never learned. B, I'm going to get rejected for them. Yeah, all these people are saying, show up emotionally, be vulnerable. I don't know what it means anyway, because I don't have access to those parts. And B, yeah, right. Yeah, right. You're saying that, but nobody really wants to see this part of me. I don't want to see this part of me. And so, it's like, that's just going to happen. I mean, if people learn to stay safe with a strategy, they're going to use it until someone comes along and helps them with a different strategy.
Now, I'm curious, do you ever see, which I've observed this sometimes, where because they don't have that permission to be vulnerable, to acknowledge the vulnerabilities, their own,
Mm-hmm.
that in denying that, and sometimes what are the words?
Disavow.
They what?
Disavow. Is that the word? Maybe.
Well, sometimes there's a way in which they set themselves up for a fall because they're denying, or they're disconnecting from these vulnerable parts of
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And I see a lot of people in the corporate world, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
people, CEOs, people who
Mm-hmm.
are highly successful, but there are these vulnerabilities and they block it out. They don't let themselves see or feel these parts of themselves. And it's like they sort of stage these catastrophic falls, where things
Mm-hmm.
blow apart or things collapse
Yes.
under
Yeah.
them, things
That's so
blow
true.
apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in the context of relationships, I've seen instances where maybe it's the husband who has that avoidant attachment style, and the wife,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes expecting that perfection in the man. The
Mm-hmm.
expectation even is the cultural thing of the male being somewhat strong and tough
Mm-hmm.
and not showing the vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
and then also complaining about, well, you're not sensitive. You're
Mm-hmm.
just so grossly insensitive to my
Yeah.
needs, and then these crashes that some of these
Mm-hmm.
men especially will
So true.
have. Yeah. And but by being able to acknowledge and connect with these deeply wounded parts of ourselves, the vulnerability, then there's the integration. The wounded parts of ourselves heal, and it builds the foundation. So instead of staging or precipitating these crashes, we see more what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I'm following here, and forgive me if I'm not following where you're trying to go, but the things that can make us successful in life are not always the same things that can make us happy in life. And you know, just to speak to this, you know, men are getting a lot of mixed messages, right? It used to be just be a provider, but now we have all this, you know, speak and narrative in the culture about being more emotionally available, but they're still getting the messages, be successful, you know, with all this overachievement culture, sports and work and academics, and, you know, but also, you know, the things that you have to do to really get to the top of that world are also the things that you have to kind of shut out to become more emotionally vulnerable. And it's hard, you know, and I think it's happening with women too. But I think common with men.
And that's part one of my interview with Julie Menanno. And I very much recommend that you get a copy of her book, either print or audio version of Secure Love, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever books are sold. Also, be sure to check out either her Instagram or Facebook, and that's The Secure Relationship. So Instagram.com, the / The Secure Relationship, and also on Facebook. Same thing, Facebook.com, The Secure Relationship. And so thank you for joining me and Julie, and also be looking for part 2 of our interview. Thanks, and bye for now.